I stood frozen in the living room, the air thick with a tension so palpable it seemed to compress every inch of space between us. Adrian, my stepson, was just a few steps away, his eyes locked on me with a mix of shock and something deeper, something I couldn't name. I had just stepped out of the bathroom, a thin towel loosely wrapped around me, my skin still damp from the shower. Every nerve in my body was on edge, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that I feared he could hear it. "Adrian," I managed to stammer, my voice trembling with an uncomfortable mix of embarrassment and disbelief. My hands clutched the edges of the towel tightly, as if it were my last defense against the moment unraveling in front of me. He didn't respond immediately, his wide eyes holding a hint of something I couldn't quite place. They lingered too long, making the air between us feel heavier. "I'm sorry, I didn't know," Adrian finally muttered, his deep voice faltering, his face flushed to deep crimson, a stark contrast to the intensity of his gaze. His eyes, piercing and lingering, felt almost too heavy to bear. "You should have knocked," I blurted, my tone sharper than I intended, as I desperately tried to regain control of the situation. Yet my voice quivered, betraying the steadiness I sought so desperately. I told myself this was just a mistake, an awkward misunderstanding, but the way his gaze lingered made the room feel smaller, the air denser, and my chest tighter. "I'm sorry," he repeated softly, his tone heavy with guilt but underpinned by something unspoken. He didn't move, his hands hanging by his sides, clenched into fists as if he were waging an internal battle I couldn't begin to understand. The tension radiating from him mirrored my own in ways I wasn't ready to confront. "You should leave," I said quickly, my words clipped and drained. I wanted to sound firm and authoritative, but the trembling in my voice betrayed me. I couldn't let this moment linger, it was dangerous, too charged with emotions I wasn't ready to acknowledge. For a brief moment, it seemed as if he might argue, might say something that would deepen the unbearable tension. But then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, the door clicking softly behind him. I was left alone in the deafening silence. I sank onto the couch, my hands still gripping the towel, as if it were a lifeline. My breathing was shallow and my thoughts raced in a chaotic blur. What had just happened? It was nothing. I told myself just an accident. Yet the memory of his gaze lingered, vivid and unshakable. It wasn't the gaze of someone stumbling into an awkward situation. There was something else in his eyes, something that unsettled me to my core. The rational part of me screamed that this was absurd, that I was overanalyzing a fleeting moment of embarrassment. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the undercurrent of tension crackling between us. It was electric, suffocating, and impossible to dismiss. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the room pressing in on me. The reality of what had transpired, or what I thought had transpired, loomed over me like a shadow. Something had shifted, something intangible yet undeniable, and the most terrifying part was that I didn't know if I had the strength or the will to stop it from growing. After Adrian left the room, I remained motionless on the couch, my mind tangled like a ball of frayed threads. The way his eyes had lingered on me echoed relentlessly in my thoughts, stealing any semblance of calm I had left. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than an awkward accident, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Memories began to swirl in my mind, pulling me back to the day I first met Adrian. It was just a few months after Daniel and I had gotten married. Daniel, my steadfast and caring husband, often spoke with pride about his son from a previous marriage, a young man navigating his way through life after a series of personal struggles. I vividly recalled the evening Daniel introduced Adrian during a cozy dinner at home. Adrian was just 19 then, a tall, confident young man with bright eyes and a disarming smile, though there was a hint of shyness about him. He had entered the room with a blend of self-assurance and hesitation, a balance typical of someone straddling the line between youth and adulthood. I had tried to make a good impression, fully aware that stepping into the role of a stepmother was never an easy task. I wanted him to feel welcome, to feel like a part of this new family we were building together. But things didn't unfold as smoothly as I'd hoped. Adrian kept his distance, always maintaining an invisible boundary between us. Our conversations were brief and laced with an awkward politeness that left me feeling like an outsider. That distance, that boundary, now loomed larger than ever. Daniel often reassured me that Adrian simply needed time to adjust, but I couldn't shake the persistent feeling of being an intruder in their world. Over time, Adrian's presence in our lives grew more constant, especially after Daniel suggested he move back home to save money while attending a vocational training program. I agreed, believing it would strengthen their bond and foster a closer family dynamic. However, Adrian's return didn't bring the warmth or ease I had envisioned. Instead, it complicated things in ways I hadn't anticipated. Adrian was no longer the bashful teenager I had first met that evening. He had transformed into a confident, capable young man who exuded an effortless magnetism. He took on household tasks, maintained the garden when Daniel was away on business, and occasionally shared quiet conversations with me. These seemingly small, insignificant moments began to linger in my mind. I found myself observing Adrian more, his demeanor, his easy smiles, and the thoughtful way he spoke about life. One afternoon stood out vividly in my memory. The coffee machine had stopped working, and I was fumbling with it in frustration when Adrian entered the kitchen, his gaze curious. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice warm and laced with humor. I laughed nervously and insisted I could manage, but he stepped forward anyway, gently taking the machine from my hands. We sat across the kitchen table as he tinkered with it. What began as casual conversation soon evolved into something more personal. Adrian opened up about his dreams, the pressures he felt to meet expectations, and the insecurities that weighed on him. For the first time, I saw a vulnerable side of him, a young man striving to carve his place in the world while grappling with self-doubt. Moments like these sparked a subtle but undeniable shift in our relationship. Adrian was no longer just Daniel's son or a member of the household. He had become someone I could confide in, someone who listened without judgment, a rare comfort I hadn't realized I longed for. I convinced myself it was a platonic connection based on mutual understanding and respect, but I was wrong. Looking back, I see how those moments blurred the boundaries between us, setting the stage for the tension now consuming my life. After what had happened earlier that day, I could no longer deny what was brewing between us, the fleeting glances, the accidental touches, the unspoken tension that hung in the air whenever we were in the same room. It all pointed to a connection that had crossed into forbidden territory. I felt trapped between guilt and longing, knowing I had allowed something to grow that should never have taken root. I sat in the quiet living room, my thoughts swirling into a storm of regret and confusion. How had it come to this? I asked myself, but the answer seemed buried beneath layers of emotions I couldn't untangle. A part of me knew I needed to end it immediately, to draw a definitive line and never look back. But another part hesitated, reluctant to let go of the flicker of vitality Adrian had brought into my life. This inner turmoil weighed heavily on me, leaving me paralyzed in my own home. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions to undo the tangled web we had created. As I sat alone, I realized the path forward would be anything but clear. After that evening, everything slipped into an unsettling limbo, with no apparent way out. The house, once a place of solace for me, now felt stifling. Every corner seemed to echo with memories and emotions I didn't know how to confront. I knew I had to make a decision, one that would irrevocably change both Adrian's life and mine. That morning, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains, I had already been awake for hours. Sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an untouched cup of coffee, my thoughts spiraled in an endless whirlwind. Adrian was still in the house, and I knew that if I didn't act now, I might never summon the courage to do what had to be done. I heard his footsteps echoing softly down the hallway, and when Adrian entered the kitchen, our eyes met briefly, heavy with unspoken words. He paused for a moment, his eyes meeting mine, and I could feel the heavy tension that hung between us like an unspoken truth. "I need to talk to you," I said softly, my voice barely audible but enough to shatter the silence. Adrian nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. The space between us felt paradoxically intimate yet insurmountably distant. "Adrian," I began, my throat tightening with each word, "I know things have gone too far. I've thought about this a lot, and I know we can't keep going like this." He remained silent, his hands clenched on the table, his gaze fixed on mine. "I knew this moment would come," he said, his voice low and hoarse, tinged with sadness. "But that doesn't make it any less painful." His words struck a chord deep within me, and I wanted to tell him how sorry I was, how I had never meant to hurt him. But those words felt hollow compared to the gravity of the moment. "Adrian, I can't deny that I have feelings for you too," I confessed, my voice trembling. "But I love Daniel, and it's more than just love, it's a commitment. It's everything we've built together. I can't destroy that, and I can't keep hurting you either." He bowed his head, his shoulders slumping under an invisible weight that seemed to press him into the chair. "I understand," he whispered, his voice barely audible but resolute. "But you need to know I've never felt this way about anyone else. You're the first person who's ever made me feel truly alive." Tears welled in my eyes, but I fought to maintain my composure. "I feel the same, Adrian," I admitted, "but that doesn't make this right. We don't belong to each other, and if we continue, we'll ruin everything, this family and ourselves." His silence stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm, his conflicted emotions evident in his pained expression. "I'll leave," he finally said after a long pause. It's the best thing for everyone. My heart shattered at his words. Adrian, you don't have to do this, I pleaded, but he interrupted me. I can't stay here any longer, he said, his voice steady but laden with anguish. Every day I'm here, I feel like I'm tearing apart your life, Daniel's life, and even my own. Tears streamed down my face as I searched for words to stop him, but deep down I knew he was right. His leaving was the only way to restore a sense of normalcy, yet the thought of losing him felt unbearable. You're an incredible person, Adrian, I said, my voice choked with emotion. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. He stood, his eyes filled with sorrow but also determination. I hope you do too, he replied before turning and walking out of the room. I didn't follow him. I sat there, listening to the sound of the door closing, the weight in my chest almost unbearable. Yet amidst the pain, there was a strange sense of release, a faint clarity that, no matter how much it hurt, I had done the right thing. In the days that followed, Daniel and I began to rebuild our relationship. I made an effort to spend more time with him, cherishing the small, ordinary moments I had once taken for granted. I realized that love wasn't just about intense emotions, but also about choices, the choice to stay committed to what truly mattered. Adrian left and I never saw him again, but his memory lingered as a constant reminder of the mistakes I had made and the lessons I had learned. Life isn't perfect, but I knew I had chosen the right path, the only path that allowed me to make peace with myself. After that fateful day, the atmosphere in the house felt irreversibly altered, as if the unspoken tension had seeped into every corner, tainting the peace I had once cherished. Adrian continued with his tasks, fixing things around the house, tending to the garden, and joining Daniel and me for dinners. But between him and me, an invisible wall had risen. It was a barrier of unspoken emotions and carefully avoided glances, yet its presence was undeniable. I tried my best to avoid Adrian's gaze, but sometimes when I wasn't quick enough, our eyes would meet. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to stand still, his eyes filled with sadness, inner turmoil, and something deeper that I couldn't bring myself to name. I knew I had to find a way to salvage what remained of my life, because some lines, once crossed, could never be undone. After that night, everything felt suspended in an unspoken limbo. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt suffocatingly heavy with unprocessed emotions and memories. I knew that to save what remained, I had to make a choice, a decision that would forever alter my life and Adrian's. That morning, before the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, staring into the untouched depths of my coffee, consumed by thoughts that refused to quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming cup of coffee before me, yet never lifting it to my lips. My thoughts churned in a chaotic storm, and my heart ached under the immense weight of what I knew had to be done. Adrian was still in the house, and I feared that if I didn't speak now, I would never find the courage to do what was necessary. The sound of his slow, measured footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway. When he entered the kitchen, our eyes met briefly, and in that fleeting glance, I could feel the shared weight of the tension between us. He paused, watching me, his expression hesitant yet expectant. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice soft but firm enough to break the oppressive silence. Adrian nodded, pulling out a chair to sit across from me. The distance between us felt both achingly close and impossibly far. "Adrian," I began, my throat tightening with every word. "I've thought about everything about us, and I know this can't continue." He didn't say a word, his fists clenched on the table, his eyes never leaving mine. After a moment, he finally spoke, his voice low and rough, tinged with a deep sadness. "I knew this was coming," he admitted, "but that doesn't make it any less painful." His words pierced me, and I wanted to apologize, to tell him how deeply sorry I was for letting things go so far. But those words felt hollow, meaningless against the gravity of the moment. "Adrian," I said, my voice trembling, "I can't deny that I feel something for you. But I love Daniel. It's not just love, it's a commitment, a life we've built together. I can't destroy that, and I can't keep hurting you like this." He bowed his head, his broad shoulders sagging, as though crushed under the weight of my words. "I understand," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper yet steady, "but you need to know I've never felt this way about anyone else. You're the first person who's made me feel truly alive." His confession sent a pang through my heart, tears threatening to spill from my eyes. But I forced myself to stay composed. "I feel the same, Adrian," I admitted, my voice faltering, "but that doesn't make this right. We don't belong together, and if we continue, we'll destroy everything, our family and ourselves." The silence that followed felt endless, suffocating. Adrian's gaze bore into mine, his eyes filled with pain and emotions he could not voice. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice steady despite the sorrow etched into every word. "I'll leave," he said. "It's what's best for everyone." My heart shattered as I watched him, knowing that this was the only way forward. "I'll always wish the best for you," I said through tears, my voice heavy with emotion. "You're an incredible person, Adrian, and I hope you find the happiness you deserve." He stood slowly, his eyes brimming with grief but carrying a quiet determination. "I hope you do too," he whispered before turning and leaving the room. I didn't follow him. I couldn't. I sat there frozen as the sound of the front door closing echoed through the house. The silence that followed was deafening, the finality of his departure pressing down on me like an unbearable weight. Yet, amid the intense pain, there was a faint glimmer of relief, a sense that, no matter how hard it was, I had made the right choice. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with Daniel. We spent more time together, rediscovering the small joys and shared moments that I had once taken for granted. I poured my energy into strengthening the bond we had nurtured over the years, understanding that love wasn't just about fleeting passion, but about enduring commitment and the choices we make to preserve what truly matters. Adrian was no longer a part of our lives, and I never saw him again. But his memory lingered, a quiet reminder of the mistakes I had made and the lessons I had learned. I carried those memories with me, not as a burden, but as a testament to my growth. Life isn't perfect, and neither am I, but I've come to realize that what matters most is the path we choose, despite our flaws. I chose to stay. I chose to fight for the life I had built, to learn from my mistakes, and to cherish the love I had vowed to protect. It wasn't easy, but it was the right decision, and in the end, that was all I could do.